Kian Tracy, who are hosting today's drop-in session on the ACCC draft guidelines on environmental and sustainability claims. Verity is the founder at Checklist Legal. Verity's got experience working as a corporate counsel for businesses like Telstra and Vocus before launching her own business 7 years ago. And Verity is joined by Kian Tracy, founder and CEO at the Sustainable Choice Group. And Kian has a long career working in marketing and comms prior to launching the Sustainable Choice Group. And we're all about, we're dedicated to simplifying sustainability for business with smart tech and community engagement platforms. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Verity and Kian. If you do have a question, and we think we'll probably get a few today, just choose the raise your hand option in the chat and we will get to you. If we can't get to your question within the allocated time, we'll reach out to you separately at the conclusion of today's session. So I would now like to hand over to Verity and Kian. Verity, any top line thoughts on the draft guidelines document? The ACCC is seeking feedback from businesses, consumers and other stakeholders. Any predictions on what that feedback might look like?
Oh gosh, we're getting right into it. No warm up there, Renee. I love it. Well, I always think it's so good to have, when you've got that opportunity to make a submission, and this is all about the Leaders in Sustainability Network, right? So what an amazing opportunity for everyone on this call, either collectively or individually, even as a consumer, to get your thoughts out there. Government has to read them and kind of list out everyone. So it could be great for your SEO as well, like getting up there on, getting your name in there as someone who's responded to these guidelines and making a submission. So I think that there's a lot in there to look over from a different angle of sustainability. In terms of the actual principles themselves, it's a lot of stuff that we're used to from Australian consumer law, and Kian and I have worked together in our telco days, and we were just saying just before we kicked off how a lot of this is just a slight pivot from industries we've worked in, which are much more highly regulated, and now people are like, oh, we have to tell the truth in this industry as well. So it's kind of quite interesting that it's a lot of similar issues, probably with a different lens. I don't know, is that kind of what you're thinking, Kian, as well?
Look, my views on this is that it's not new at all. This is all leaning on the environmental claims laws that existed prior to this document coming out, prior to the ACCC talking about it. I think my assumption is that the ACCC takes action when their business gets busier. And so the more ACCC complaints that are coming through, the more questions that are getting asked, they're like, oh, all right, it's time to kick into gear. And so what they've done is they've gone and read the consumer laws and said, all right, this is how to follow them. And that's my look at this. It's like how to baby steps on how to follow the laws that have existed. And I've seen a few iterations of those laws, but they've existed for quite some time. So from my perspective, this is kind of like 101, how to follow the law. And a lot of it is like, don't tell lies. If you're telling somebody that it's a fact, tell them where the facts came from. So a lot of it's quite basic, but I think that everyone is out there now confused about, is this ACCC guidance about how sustainable we are as a business, or is it about something else? And what do we need to do? Do we need to go and check our emissions? And yes, you should be, but there's a few different moving parts in this. So this one is all about how do we talk about sustainability first and foremost. So that's kind of the key thing for us to be discussing today. And this goes down to, and we're going to open up for questions, but this goes down to whether you put Australian made, organically grown, better for the planet, if you put a picture of a leaf on your pack. That's what this is about. So if anyone in the room is doing those things, those are the kinds of questions that you need to be thinking about.
And that's that whole essence of what is an environmental claim. And it's kind of, if you're making a claim or giving the impression that something about your business, about your products, about your services are having a neutral or positive impact on the environment, are kind of less harmful than some other alternatives, or they have specific environmental benefits, and that's an environmental claim. And you can do that with words, you can do it visually, you can do it in lots of different ways. But that's the essence of what these greenwashing guidelines are looking at, those claims that you're making.
Let me give you an example of something that probably businesses have been getting away with, and I'd say they won't anymore. So if you put a dolphin on the front of, on the billboard, you've got a nice clean blue ocean and you've got a dolphin in it, and it's because you're using recycled plastics, or if it's because your packaging is recyclable and doesn't need to end up in landfill and therefore the ocean, that's a very, very big stretch. Now, if you donated, $2 million to the Save the Dolphins Foundation, maybe less so. So these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. Like, does it loosely connect to the dolphin, or does it directly connect? And did I explain what I did?
And for us, this overall impression is something that's been getting around in consumer law for a long time. And when I first started talking about this, I would call it that Tinder test. It's like that overall impression of that first page on a Tinder profile or a dating profile. Like, what's the impression that you get from that? Because it is, especially with smaller consumer goods, where people don't take a lot of time. They're looking at it, like you said, they're looking at a tin, they're looking at a bottle or something, and they're like, dolphins, okay, it's good for dolphins, and they buy like really quickly. They shouldn't have to do their own investigative study on what you mean when you say dolphin. So it's about that first impression, the Tinder test of what does this immediately give me as an impression on that product. And or also about that business.
To that Tinder test, it's also about, do you have an unfair advantage? So if you're looking at a shelf and it's got 20 different brands of soft drink, and one of them has a big green recycle arrow on it, amazing, and it really stands out, and it says, because this bottle is recyclable, and every single bottle on the shelf is recyclable, most likely. It is most likely that all of these are in the same situation in this state. All of these things go through the same recycling facilities. Then also, even though it's true, if you're giving yourself an unfair advantage on something that is standard or expected, that's also at a risk of greenwashing. Like, there's quite a few different factors here. Like, you really need to be careful. You really need to be careful. Do we have any questions? There's a stack of people in here. I think the more people we have, the less people want to ask questions.
Oh, come on. Yeah, we could get some questions.
I've got a quick question to kick off. So does the document ensure that stakeholders are complying with Australian consumer law?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily means that everyone's going to be following the law from now on. And I think it's pointers, and as we said, it's principles of the general consumer law, because there's not specific like laws against sustainability claims. It's based on other laws that have been around for a while. We're just kind of making them apply to some of the new claims that are coming out. So I think it's going to give people a lot of like that baseline level of, okay, we can't just say whatever we want. We need to start to pivot a little bit. But it's also, I mean, this has been part of the ACCC's enforcement priorities. Like, they've talked about it a lot. So they've gone a softly approach. They're now doing this, seeking submissions. They've given the principles. So I think from probably next year, it's going to be like, well, how many more warnings do you need? And there's a lot of action that's coming around, especially from an ASIC point of view, which is the financial services regulator. But they're looking at claims that companies, like mining companies and superannuation companies, are making in relation to their products in their product disclosure statements. So there's a lot of action going on, and I think it's going to go from intervention and warnings to more penalties soon. So I don't know if it's going to change it, but it's going to hopefully it's a wake-up call.
So, Verity, can I ask you a question from a legal perspective on this? So it actually does state in this document, I can't remember the exact words, something along the lines of like the size of the business will be taken into account.
Yes. Yep.
So have you got any examples of where you've seen maybe a bigger business, or like, I'm trying to understand how our community here can see whether they are, you know, the size of their business is relevant, or if they're, it feels like a gray area to me when they say the size of the business is relevant, but like, you know.
Well, I think, I mean, to take extreme examples, the sustainability claims that like a kind of like a mum and dad dry cleaning business makes is very different to like the sustainability claims that a mining company makes, because there's obviously a lot more at stake for it. And the way that the ACCC looks at these from that, the size of the business matters, is it's looking at the sophistication of the business. It's looking at the potential, like what did they benefit from the infringing conduct? So was there a larger benefit if they were kind of banging on about it in a big way, and that drew in a bunch of investors or a lot of consumers? So I think that's where the size can come into it as well. But you should also, if you're a larger business, then you theoretically need to be allocating resources in order to not mislead your consumers and your customers. So I think those are the things that the ACCC means when it talks about the size of the business.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that really answers my question as well, Verity, like the scale to which you can benefit or affect is possibly, and all this means is that that's what comes first. As it trickles down. The same things happened previously in compliance and financial laws and things. It all started at the top, but nowadays these things happen at every single level. This isn't going to take 10 years to get to the mums and dads businesses. This is going to happen really fast. It's going to start with these large organizations, and then once they've got that right, I think the hardest thing is trying to figure out how they actually enforce a lot of these things. And there are governments and scientists all over the world right now trying to figure out what is the black and white law here, what is the way we can enforce it. And they haven't figured a lot of that out yet, but they can't wait for that.
That's right. And I mean, that's also what we're seeing with the accounting standards. Like, I'm obviously not an accountant, but all of the ESG reporting requirements, how can we get some reporting standards in place so that people who want to invest in cleaner or more sustainable companies can compare apples with apple, or green apples with green apples, so that way the standards are all reporting on the same thing. The accountants know what to look for, the auditors know what to look for. You can assess companies against each other to see whether or not their claims are backed up in their numbers.
So to that point, the and one thing that I think is very important for everybody in the room. So did we have a question? No. One of the things that this document talks very heavily about, consumer confidence. And this is about saying, what are we doing collectively as an industry to provide consumers with the level of confidence that they deserve so that they can make these choices? And that means that even if they're never going to read the certificate of authenticity of organic that you have put behind the QR code on the label, what we're trying to do is give them confidence that there is a level of regulation that if you set it, it exists.
Yeah.
So this is not necessarily about giving them the certificate. This is about them trusting that it's there, which means that, guys, you've got to do it regardless of whether or not they're going to read that report or that audit or that certificate.
Yeah, and it's the same as a lot of the work that got put into the beautiful, bouncing kangaroo for the Made in Australia label. Like, a lot of work went into that because it was seen as a real, it's very powerful in Australia, it's powerful overseas, and so we want people to be able to trust that symbol. So I think that we're going to see a lot more.
Hi, Penny.
Happening. Oh, we've got a question from,
Did you want to share something? Oh, we can't hear you.
So I was so busy chatting away then. I'm just saying it's so noisy in the office, so sorry. just to your point, Karen, it's really interesting. So we do have, I'm at Snooze for everyone else, and we do have a quilt that is made by ocean-bound plastic. So this is a really interesting one, and that's why I asked you.
There, Penny.
Because I know people are using this, and we're obviously using it too, and there was a question mark around it. So I think this is probably an interesting topic to sort of to talk about. Because we are, and it's also based on obviously underprivileged people collecting the bottles. So there's a really lovely message from a societal community point of view. And to be frank, you probably would be under the expectation that these bottles are ocean bound. They are, but they're being collected and then they're being recycled into something. So it probably is somewhat tenuous, and I think that's one that is being looked at.
Very, very good point. You really got me in probably one of the toughest ones, Penny, but it's a really important conversation. So this is where laws and court of public opinion come together now. This was going to be a part of this conversation, which is, yes, there are laws, but the laws are irrelevant if your customers hate you for something, or if somebody comes after you for something, or if somebody doesn't trust you. So ocean-bound plastic. I'm sure Remy will get us a specific definition of ocean-bound plastic and pop it in the chat. But it's something along the lines of plastics that have been diverted from oceans, because from a distance, it might be 50 Ks from the ocean or something rather broad. Now, I know there are a lot of organizations out there that don't believe that that is a reasonable thing to hang your hat on. So what's happening at the moment is there is a bit of backlash against businesses leaning on ocean bound, particularly those, as I mentioned earlier, that are using pictures of oceans, right? That's actually, there was some backlash, it's been in the news lately, from a company that was using pictures of oceans to uplift their ocean-bound plastic claims. So there needs to be some re-guided regulation on that, I think, because there is a lot of confusion and it's unfair. But your decision now is, I believe, and don't quote me on this, general advice only, but I believe it's actually okay to say ocean-bound plastic by law if it meets those requirements that Remy would have put in here. Mm-hmm. However, if your customers or if certain social groups are going to be coming after you and making complaints, don't do it. It's not worth it. You have too much at stake to be putting yourself at risk of saying things that people don't trust. And I'd say this is a good example of something that in 6 or 12 months' time, it will get changed and you will have that forever. So start thinking now. Still, you can say this has been picked up from landfill. Put a little QR code, pop it on your sustainability tracker profile, exactly where that came from. And be careful with the language that you use, particularly around oceans, because there are groups that don't like it and they're publicizing it. And you need to pay attention to that. We have a hand up. I saw a hand go up.
Did I see Moira Smythe? Moira, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say we use 2 different initiatives that are from ocean-bound plastic, but we've had it looked at by a legal team in addition to the 2 different companies that supply us with. So all of our packaging is made from ocean-bound plastic, and as long as we are able to say that it is made from certified recycled ocean-bound waste, then it's okay, because we can certify we've got the documentation and the certification. And something like a better packaging company, they work with so many NGOs, like the amount of information they have to validate what they're doing. We're able to say that, but it is ocean bound, even if it's from a beach or a riverbed, because it will eventually end up in the ocean. So we're not saying we're pulling waste out of the ocean. Like, you see those huge machines that go out into the middle of those, I think they're called gyros, and they're sucking it up like a big vacuum and taking it away. We're not saying that. So you must say ocean bound. That's the very important part.
And this comes back to the principles that are in, that greenwashing guidance, and you can almost use them like a checklist, because it's like, make accurate and truthful claims. So are you being accurate and truthful? Do you have evidence to back up your claims? And you've got, you've done the hard yards to kind of figure that out. And I think it's not about just doing it once and then being like, sweet, we're set forever now on this ocean-bound plastic thing. You want to keep checking in and being like, okay, so is it still ocean-bound, or is there something weird that's going on where now people are dumping plastic in there and it's kind of like this weird thing that's happening? So I think just kind of keeping those claims current, working through those principles.
Before we take our next question, just to that point, Moira, there's something else in that, which is about the context and the priority of that claim. So let's say you've got a garment, a workwear garment, for example, that is, 1 kilo, and you've got a 10-gram plastic packaging, and it's got in big, bold letters, made from ocean-bound plastic, when the bulk of the product is not, but that packaging is, even though it's factually correct, there is a hierarchy thing that is involved in that as well, which is to say that 1% of what you're holding is made from ocean-bound plastic. Now, I don't know, I'm not specifically talking about products here, but I think that everybody kind of needs to understand is also like the clarity on which part of the product. That's what's coming now. Like, tell us percentage.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. We say the packaging is this, or the hangers are this, and we speak to any of the garments that maybe are as a totally different thing. We don't say that that's so
that's great.
But we have scaled back everything we had on our website. We took away measurements even though we had them. So
why did you do that?
Because it was just too I did a full day at a law firm that specializes in representing clients who are being sued by the ACCC or whatever, fined. And they just put the fear of God in us. And so we scaled everything back because it's just not worth it. And most people are just going to go, like, we'll speak to it. We'll say 38 tons, an approximation of 38 tons of plastic is saved from going into the ocean because blah 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 blah. Or we'll speak to it if we're talking to customers, but we don't put it in writing. We don't put it on our website, which is unfortunate because the impact is so huge.
So unfortunate, and this is a very specific example where there are ocean-led organizations who have taken issue with the fact that something can be called ocean-bound without having ever landed in the ocean. And so even though we're all factually correct in this room and it meets the requirement, there are some voices who are saying, you shouldn't be allowed to say that. We disagree with it. And so they're making noise that is irrelevant of the laws, right? So, and they're actually pinpointing brands as well. And this is where we have to start thinking, as you said, is it worth it? And that breaks my heart, right? It breaks my heart that we have to scale back the conversation right now when we desperately need the conversation. But it is, we also need to our brands.
Yeah, well, we changed the terminology because we weren't saying ocean bound previously. So so we were saying we're saving this from the ocean. So that's when we changed everything, but that was under advisement of both Arch and Hook and Better Packaging. So they have legal advice. And then
don't waive your professional privilege then.
It's a really good, it's a very good example of adjusting your messaging. Like, this is the kinds of things we need to be thinking about in this room is, should I have said saved from the ocean versus ocean-bound plastic? That is a perfect example of the kinds of things we all need to be thinking about to step it up. Thank you, Moira. We have another question.
We've just got Giles first.
Oh, sorry, Giles. I thought I saw your name.
Are you there, Giles?
Yeah, sure I am. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to know, I mean, obviously I think that the struggles around ocean-bound plastic have largely come from the fact that there's a lot of nonsense going on with stuff that really is or isn't ocean-bound plastic, right? And that's where all these ocean organizations are coming from. So the thing is, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with ocean-bound plastic, but what we do need to do if we're using it is to get the proof. And there's a few tremendous suppliers of ocean-bound plastic who are using things like blockchain to at a very granular level prove where everything's come from. You know, so if you're buying your stuff from somewhere like that, for example, Plastic Bank, right, is a Canadian organization that basically rescues ocean-bound plastic from all over the world and collects it all up, and every single bucketful is blockchain traced back to the individual person who collected it. And so with that kind of level of traceability, you know, you can prove anything you want with regards to that, right? And I think that's ultimately where we all need to be thinking about going, because it's too easy to use big terms like ocean-bound plastic. You know, I think Remy put in the definition, it's 50 kilometers from the shoreline, right? I mean, you know, that's a stretch, to be honest. You know, 50 kilometers is a long way. And yeah, okay, maybe in 10,000 years it might be in the ocean, but it's a bit of a stretch. So for me, it's about leveraging the providers that are out there doing an amazing job of giving you the resources you need to communicate clearly. And once you do that, I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with it.
Just before we go to Phil's question, to your point, Giles, and to what Zadie's just written in the chat here, the one thing I would say about these like life cycle assessments and getting all of the audits, etc., is that they are expensive and they are time consuming. And there's two issues with that. The big businesses that can afford them often they're putting a lot of they're stringent with their budgets, and so it's very hard to get approval to do it. And then the small businesses just physically don't have the money. So there's a privileged few who have all of these things that I can see. Zadie's here. Yes, I'd say, Zadie, that you're one of the privileged few that has access to all of these audits and all of these third-party organizations. And definitely something to think about. But there's got to be something in the middle of all of this that makes it easier for the everyday business. And I guess that's what we are trying to sort of uncover as well. Enough from me. Phil, welcome, Phil.
Thank you. It's more comment than question. I do shed a tear when I hear organisations going to lawyers for advice about. I look at, you know, there is the legal aspect, and I know this talk is about ACCC, but you are going to the no department to find out what you should talk about. And so greenhushing, if you want to go greenhushing, talk to the lawyers. There is a middle ground. This place that we're all playing in is completely flexible. Are the ACCC going to come after all of us? You know, that's the fear of God that will happen when we talk to lawyers. But we've got to find the realistic middle. And, you know, Giles mentioned it's evidence. It's all about evidence and having the evidence. You also need to be ready to talk through social license, but also, you know, if there is legal issues. I put an amazing business in the chat called Oratain. They're a Kiwi business, and they're doing traceability, not through blockchain. Well, they are doing that work as well, but they're doing it through scientific means. Now, that kind of process can be quite expensive, but irrefutable. It's nearly DNA kind of stuff, but an amazing tool for organizations that can afford it. So it's all evidence and credible, and it gives you the social license to be able to respond if you are being accused of anything. So it's just that evidence and credibility. I think the other thing that I'm finding interesting is we all love the ocean. It's really important for Australia, but I'm finding it interesting how many businesses are picking the ocean, and maybe it would be interesting to reflect more on not just your brand, but what your organizations are already doing amazingly well in the ESG space before just picking a heartland. Like, we all love the ocean and the dolphins and the large mammals that swim there are amazing, but there's other ways to pick amazing organizations that you could work with. And you know, something we're seeing is green is cool, man, the ocean's cool, but you know, social impact is so very important. So there's a whole range of amazing work we can do and impact we can do. Sorry, I'm going off on a rant, so I'll stop talking now. I'm just basically agreeing with all of the heads in the room.
It's an important point, and we are talking, and I think very quickly, the ACCC guidance speaks very closely to the environmental claims laws. So, I mean, take this guidance to your social impact comms as well, but they're not actually in there yet. So, I mean, we need to be stepping up, as you said, Phil, and thinking holistically about this. We know where we're going. We know what's coming. We know what's important. So we absolutely need to be thinking about it holistically. Take the guidance as a minimum of what you should be doing and do more. That's my advice. Verity, did you want to add to that particular point before we hear from Giles?
I did. I'm not too offended, but I would just say that if you're seeing your lawyers or compliance team as the no department, then something's gone wrong. Either it's your attitude towards kind of engaging in those discussions, or you've got the wrong lawyers or the wrong compliance team in the room. Because Kian and I have been lawyer and marketer, and we have great, robust discussions. And this is something that I talk about. There must be a good relationship, a good tension between compliance, legal, and marketing, and kind of those business. Because if the lawyers are saying no all the time and the marketers are doing it anyway, or if the marketers or the business is just doing what they say, then you're not getting the most out of your business. You're not actually talking about great things. Flip side, if the lawyers are saying yes, say whatever you want, then you've got problems as well. So I think you've got to have a good relationship with your compliance and legal team, because they should be pointing things out to you. Hopefully not just putting the fear of God in you, but giving you strategies and those bumper bowling bars. This is where you go to. Don't fall off the gutter.
I think
don't fall into the gutter.
Our example is that when we work on things together, is that it's a bit of a negotiation. It's not necessarily I come to you and then my lawyer says no. I say, well, how about this? You go, why don't we go there? Or it has to be. And one of the things Verity says to me all the time is we need to balance it. So if you want to do that, you need to balance it with this. And so you can. Very different if you've got really, really fancy, expensive lawyers that are just out there to protect you and make sure there is absolutely zero issue, right?
This goes back to size as well, KT, because I remember going from a small telco and then going to Telstra, and you 100% feel the target on your back get bigger. When you're working with bigger companies, you've got bigger risks. You're advertising in bigger places. Like a billboard is harder to change than your website. Do you know what I mean? So it's like the bigger you get, the bigger the target is. So yeah, that's why you do get some conservatism.
Yeah, fair. That's fair. Giles, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I'd like to pick the group's brains around the evolution of the guidance around broad claims. Back in October when they first came out, the advice pretty much was, yeah, don't do it. Mustn't, waggy finger, do not use broad claims. Now the guidance seems to have evolved somewhat to being, yeah, don't do it, but if you're going to do it, support it with evidence. And the reason I think this is interesting is that, if we take ESG communications and sustainability marketing as two completely different things, because they are, consumers know words like sustainable and eco-friendly, and they're actively looking for them, right, when they're making purchases. So if brands are not using those, they're effectively taking themselves out of that conversation. They're effectively taking themselves out of that customer journey. So it's a real challenge. So what are your thoughts on this, Verity, I guess, initially, but anybody really, what are your thoughts on brands being able to continue to say, this is a far more sustainable product, or that we believe that you should be able to buy sustainably, so long as brands are then providing exact guidance to the consumer on what they mean by those terms. So click through, explain what sustainable means in this context. What are your thoughts on that kind of approach?
Yeah, it depends. Of course, classic lawyer answer, it depends. So it's kind of looking at that broad claim that you're making. What's the overall impression? You're going through that checklist. Is it true by itself, or do you need like a full page of disclaimers to like, oh, but we only met in this particular country at this particular time and in this, like, when the moon's full and everything else. So if you're writing off that first impression with a whole bunch of different bits of information, I would say it's moving more towards the don't do kind of basket. If it's a broad claim that you're confident about, that you think is factual and true by itself, then yeah, I think you can make a broad claim. But it's, again, it's going back to those principles. Is it true? Is it accurate? Are you being misleading by silence? Because silence can be misleading as well. What you don't say can sometimes be just as impactful as what you do say.
In the chat, the words you used were vague, Giles. In voice, you said broad. Now, often they say broad and ambiguous claims. To me, I actually find those two really different things, and I find the term vague, broad and ambiguous to be rather vague, broad and ambiguous in itself, because it doesn't actually define what is vague, broad, or ambiguous. So we've taken an assumption that saying things like greener, cleaner, better for the planet, eco-friendly as being vague, broad, or ambiguous. I feel that if you're going to say something like better for the planet, you better be damn sure of what percentage of your industry you are better than. You better be damn sure of precisely how much better you are now than you were, and you better have science to back it up. I wouldn't be saying things like that. Like the better, greener stuff, I think requires so much substantiation about either where you've come from or what the industry average is. And my personal opinion is it's too risky. I wouldn't, like, if it was me, I wouldn't do it. But saying things like eco-friendly, I hear your point. Consumers need to buy things they understand, and only understand a few words. But why do they understand what eco-friendly means? Do they know that word is actually around ecological? Do they actually know what that? It doesn't actually mean anything. So we've done consumers a disservice by getting them used to words that are so broad that they don't know whether it's organic soap, whether it's recycled plastic, whether it's biodegradable plastic, whether it's commercially compostable plastic. Like, they don't know. And I don't know the answer, but I just feel like keeping on using language just because they're used to it, I don't know. And I'm a marketer. Like, I'm a proper hardcore marketer that's done this my whole career. And even I don't feel comfortable with that. What do you think, Giles?
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with anything you just said. I think that the conundrum we find ourselves in is that we're faced with a situation where consumers may come into that conversation, whether the conversation is simple as looking at a product on a shelf, or whether it's through, some sort of marketing campaign, with very, very different opinions about their own interpretation of those terms. And I think that's the danger, because, one person can think eco-friendly means something very, very different from, the next person that comes to the shelf. And there's the challenge, because that inherently means that you might be misguiding someone. That to me is the challenge. But with some of them, things like green and so on, I don't really see any need to use those terms, to be honest with you. But there are some things like, particularly sustainable, right? The word sustainable is the sticking point for me, because in all the work that we've done to understand what customers are looking for, they search for the word sustainable. They search for the word sustainability almost before anything else. And eco-friendly probably is the next one down. And so, when it comes to, so I'm not talking now about trying to position a product that is not good for, better in some way, made out of organic materials, or, you've done your life cycle assessments, or, I'm not talking about, something that's really, really bad, and you're trying to badge it as something that's good. I'm talking about products that are genuinely thoughtfully comprised, make conscious decisions have gone into it, and we have some backing for how we're marketing it. Those sorts of things, if we don't use some of those broader terms that are very familiar to customers, then we are perhaps missing out on being able to start a conversation with someone, because they just move on to the next thing where they can see that checkbox that says, okay, it's sustainable. So for me, I don't know what the right answer is, hence why I'm asking it. But for me, I like to think that if we're going to use those terms, that we have an appropriate level of decision making and proof behind them, that we can lay out for those people to click through and investigate should they choose to. And that to me is the important thing.
Well, it's lucky that there's a platform that exists where people can click through really easily and find this information.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that, Kiana?
To be honest with you, when I first saw this guidance, it was music to my ears, eyes, whatever, because this is what we've been building it for. We've been building it so that you guys can put all of this data in one place quickly, easily, takes you no time at all, and then it's done and it's there, and you know that you can keep it up to date. And you don't have to ask for your web developers to go and change things because you have to put in a job ticket and it takes 3 weeks to get the website updated, all that sort of junk. That's why we did this, to make it easy for you. Let's
just on that sustainable word though, that we're talking about there, that there is ASIC's launched its first kind of proceedings about greenwashing against a superannuation company that had 7 sustainable plus investment options, and but consumers could actually, but some of their investments were in fossil fuels. So it hasn't been decided yet, but this is, I think it's going to be an interesting, because it's going to look at that word sustainable, and it's going to be quite an interesting one to follow along, because ASIC's saying, well, you've used a word, but it's not quite clear. Maybe you do have some sustainable investment options, but some of those investment classes had some fossil fuels in them.
Sustainable is such a massive, massive word, because it fundamentally means that you can do what you're doing right now without having any negative impact on generations of the future. And there is virtually nothing that, I mean, there might be some things, but there's not a lot. Hence why we put our hand up and said, you know what, we've learnt real fast that our website name is no longer right. We need to change it. So we took this big step to change it, because we acknowledge that actually this is a really challenging word to use. I'm glad that there's a little bit of a topic that's been raised around talking climate and carbon, because we talk a lot about plastics and packaging and all that sort of stuff in these communities. And I'm really fascinated to know a little bit more about what people understand about things like carbon neutral, climate positive, all of, net zero goals, all those sorts of things. Nobody has to put their hand up for this, but if anybody would be interested in sharing, even in the chat, or please put your hand up if you want to, but I'd be interested if anybody in the room has customer data on the sustainability claims that they make. Like, has anybody gone and found that their customers want to see recycled plastic, carbon neutral, or something along those lines, and they've actually started making a change based on what their customers are doing or what their customers are buying? Because we hear people saying all the time, people are buying these products. Yes, they're buying it, but harder to get specific examples. But while you're all having a think about that, carbon neutral is a really interesting one. I was chatting to somebody this morning about carbon neutrality and trying to briefly go through scope 1, 2, and 3. I'm not going to do it here, especially while this is getting recorded, because I won't get it right. But it is, I mean, I talk about it all the time, and it's hard to sort of clarify really understanding each scope, and then how you can be carbon neutral, but not necessarily your entire operations, maybe just this location or all that sort of stuff. So interested in anybody's take on carbon neutrality and how that language gets used or, misused perhaps. Verity, any thoughts on that?
On how carbon neutral gets used and misused, yeah, I mean, I think we've seen in some instances how companies have used it and they've said, we're going to be like just outlandish claims and going through those principles checklists, the standard consumer law approach. If you're making representations as to future matters, we will be carbon neutral by 2050 or something. You've got to have a reasonable basis to make that claim. You can't just be like living on a wish and a prayer and just imagining that some kind of magic technology is going to come along that's going to get you there. You need to have a solid basis. You need to have the reporting, the evidence, the substantiation to make that claim. So that's where people get into trouble, where I've seen it. If you're starting to muddy the waters and say, like, this particular product is carbon neutral, that's quite interesting. Again, you need to be able to
That's
think that down the line. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that you can't do it. I think people are trying to, it's when you're manufacturing products, you've got big bits and pieces that a lot of moving parts, so you can't just automatically switch over. And it's about, and I think the ACCC, and especially the work that that you're doing, KT, it's about recognizing that road to more sustainable practices. So I think you don't want to be damned if you do and damned if you don't, from trying your best to have a more sustainable product, but it's just about learning the different nuances of how you talk about it. And it's happened in the past, organic claims, country of origin claims. I think it's just that level of sophistication is coming around some of those words and some ways of presenting them.
Yeah, there's probably heaps of precedent in how these things have been presented in the past, and then get substantially more strict as time goes on. Phil, did you have a comment on that?
I just wanted one thing where I'm being gentle how I say this, but
it's going to tell me no.
No. You said a line, and I was trying to remember it, and it's gone from me now. So I was going to agree with you first, Verity, for the first time, which is the important part is the journey towards sustainability and constant improvement, all that lovely stuff. But what we are doing is we're really trying to encourage our clients not. I'm being careful here. Look better than offsetting, because offsetting is such a band-aid. It's so unbelievably short term, and it's also setting traps for later, because it's a really attractive solution, right? We can fix a problem by offsetting with X amount of money and doing whatever we're doing, but so we really try and influence our clients to look more towards, reduce or reuse, and the path to sustainability, because many of them are going, wow, this offsetting is such a quick, easy solution for us to get to carbon neutrality. It's a big trap, and it's going to cost them a lot more later. And, so offsetting is one that we're trying to steer folk away from.
It's a big old drop-in session of its own, that one, isn't it? There's so much to unpack in that. And it's probably, my opinion on this, just my personal opinion, is that I feel that as regulations come through, the easiest way for governments to put in laws and parameters around something that can be measured rather specifically, this is one thing that they can measure, be it good offsets or bad offsets. They can measure this to a number, and it's, my guess is this is the first thing that will come in with actual real sustainability laws, will be about emissions impact, and that, because it's so hard to talk about your social impact in a number, or the recyclability of something, when the recyclability is out of the hands of the business, it's in the hands of the consumer. But one thing they can calculate is the CO2 emissions equivalent, right? And that is where they're going to say, let's get products, your product needs to be carbon neutral, your business needs to be carbon neutral. So my gut feel is that's where governments are going to go. And so businesses are there's going to be a rage of offsetting and all sorts of things that will be problematic. And then there's going to need to be laws around that and how to do it right. But I would say still be
understanding is on. We're in it. They're doing it. The offsetting is on. It's on. So, yeah.
I think every business in this drop-in right now, if you haven't started thinking about doing your carbon accounting and getting a view of where you're at and where your products are at, where your gaps are, and what the low-hanging fruit is for emissions reduction, you're behind. It's time to, at the very least, you need to know where you are. You may not be in a position to go and make fundamental changes this year, but you really need to know where you are from an emissions perspective, because if somebody flicks a switch and says you need to meet a certain goal by a certain time and you have no idea where you are today, you're going to be in trouble. Again, personal opinion, but trust me on that one. Giles?
Yeah, I won't chime in anymore on carbon offsetting. I agree with what you both just said. Phil, thank you for saying that. Carbon offsets are, I think, a huge rort and mishandled massively. Anyway, moving on to answering the first part of your question, Kian. So I don't necessarily have empirical data, but as part of our process, we end up talking to somewhere between 15 and 50 of our customers when it comes to understanding why they buy products from the brands. So I should probably say that we work with sustainable brands to help them tell their sustainability messaging effectively. And as a result of that, one of the first steps we always do is to talk to our clients' customers, a bigger group of them as we can get hold of, to establish why they buy. And so if I sort of deconstruct that a little bit, what we've seen very clearly is that there's a hierarchy of things that people look for. And bear in mind that this is a microcosm, right? So it's not the general population, because people that tend to buy from these brands tend to be fairly conscious in what they buy. So it is a bit skewed. But one of the first things one of the most important things they look for is absolutely sustainability in packaging, right? That is a ubiquitous thing. And I know, for myself, and I'm sure you're all the same, that resonates with me. When I buy something that I think is a good for the planet product in some way, I realize it's a vague term in itself, but you understand what I mean. It really annoys me when it comes in plastic packaging and bubble wrap and stuff like that and have thrown in the bin. It sort of defeats the whole brand purpose. So that's very, very important, and it's ubiquitous. The next thing is clearly what it's made of, and making sure that people in the supply chain are well looked after. So people hate to think that they're buying from brands that don't care about fair wages and all that sort of stuff. And then really the third one comes down to then impact, and impact's growing massively. That's changed a lot in the last 2 years. We've seen that rise in importance in terms of the checkbox in the exercise of which brand do I buy from. Those brands that are genuinely making a difference in the world and converting their profits into difference in the external world are starting to really grab market share. So my message from that to everybody is, think about that completely as the way you're looking at business, and figure out how you can leverage your business for good, and then communicate that sincerely and authentically, because you will win market share with doing it.
It's true. It's true. We just hope people are winning market share by doing the right thing. Verity, you just wrote something, but there's probably a lot of people that are just listening and not reading the comments. Can you just mention that, please?
Yeah, it's just I have some clients that I work with in farming, in carbon farming, and I kind of looking at the process that they go through. 100% agree that some offsets are bullshit, but I think that some of them are quite well thought out. There's a lot of co-benefits and a lot of a push towards that from a carbon market perspective, because there's a lot of funding that goes into it, and people are chasing the money. They want to get the money, so they want to set their farms up correctly. They're seeing it as a succession plan. They want to do the right thing. Regenerative farming is, there's a huge push for that in Australia. So I think just writing off offsets all with the same brush is maybe a little bit unfair, but yeah, I agree that often you need to look a bit further than just like buying them from some rando online.
Agree. I reckon we got a couple more minutes. So Phil, if anyone has any pressing questions, please let us know. But otherwise, we'll probably drop off in a couple of minutes. Phil?
So sorry, we were talking about evidence and data, supporting that people are turning towards green. I just want to lift that up, because it's not just customers buying green stuff, it's capital markets. It is, teams. And Deloitte just released a research paper or research results 2 days ago, I think, and I had a quick look, but I can't find it. But it's more than half of senior employees, like senior level employees, are all on the lookout for more sustainable jobs. So it's not just customers. The labor market is moving. And if we want to start talking about, Gen Zs and millennials,
yeah,
like it's right near the top. And again, there's data and evidence for that when we look at their prioritization list around what they look for in an employer. When you go, there's money and there's lifestyle, et cetera. Sustainability is right up there. And again, capital markets, there's evidence around this that having your ESG in order is attracting more capital when you're trying to raise with whether it's VCs or other. So it's, customer, yes, but there's a whole range.
To that point, Renee, can you please write down, let's do a drop-in on employment and all of the things around the push for working in more ESG focused businesses, because I think that's huge, and we'll get a recruiter into that. Rob, do you want to finish us off?
Yeah, thanks, Carney. I think just to follow up on Verity's note, I think it's very interesting. You might be able to consider using some of the offsets, because I've been looking at them, and I totally agree with just offsets generally. I think especially if they're not locally, there is something that there's some people that I sort of follow, and they come from a very kind of hard edge, but they're starting to talk about this idea of offsets really being a problem in developing countries, and they're talking about, you know, neo-colonialism. And so I think that that's going to be a big issue. Like, I don't want to go down that sort of path. That's a whole kettle of fish you probably don't want to open. But the idea, I think, might be interesting for brands to kind of look at how might they support through some kind of social justice, as well as the offset, but also future beneficial practice, which can be a great story. I'm looking at, without like kind of getting into any kind of idea of going too far, but I have been looking at Cool Burning Indigenous, where they basically are teaching Indigenous youth how to do cool burning stuff. Has a great, you know, there's a few around. There's one in Victoria, there's one in Queensland, and so you can use those offsets. So I think that you know, the idea that offsets, if they stack and they're local, that's the other thing.
I reckon there's a drop-in session on that too,
Yeah.
to be honest. I think we need to get a few different perspectives on that, because it is so broad. There is a spectrum of these that go from amazing, like some of the things we've talked about, Verity and yourself, Rob, all the way to absolute shonky bullshit. Said they planted a tree and they planted them 1 centimeter apart. They'll never grow. It's all garbage. So it goes, there's a huge spectrum. It is 10:59 and we have had a really amazing conversation. It is my absolute pleasure in life to be able to bring all of these minds together, for those to listen, for those to share, for those to learn. Verity, thank you so much for your very valuable
Thanks for
time.
having me. It's lovely to chat with everyone.
I thank everybody for coming along. It means so much to me, and I hope we are learning, growing, developing. If there's anything more we can do, we're here. We don't know all the answers, but we know all these people who know lots of answers. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming along, everyone.
Thank you.